Chapter 3 continued. Slarty Bartfast was marching out onto the pitch with terrible purpose in his gait. His hair, beard, and robes swept behind him, looking very much as Moses would have looked if Sinai had been a well-cut lawn instead of, as it is more usually represented, a fiery smoking mountain. "He said to meet him at the ship," said Arthur. "What in the name of Zarking Fardwax is the old fool doing?" exploded Ford. "Meeting us at his ship in 2 minutes," said Arthur with a shrug, which indicated total abdication of thought. They started off toward it. Strange sounds reached their ears. They tried not to listen, but could not help noticing that Slarty Bartfast was querulously demanding that he be given the silver urn containing the ashes, as they were, he said, vitally important for the past, present, and future safety of the galaxy, and that this was causing wild hilarity. They resolved to ignore it. What happened next they could not ignore. With a noise like 100,000 people saying, "Whop!" a steely white spaceship suddenly seemed to create itself out of nothing in the air directly above the cricket pitch, and hung there with infinite menace and a slight hum. Then for a while it did nothing, as if it expected everybody to go about their normal business and not mind its just hanging there. Then it did something quite extraordinary. Or rather, it opened up and let something quite extraordinary come out of it. 11 quite extraordinary things. They were robots. White robots. What was most extraordinary about them was that they appeared to have come dressed for the occasion. Not only were they white, but they carried what appeared to be cricket bats. And not only that, but they also carried what appeared to be cricket balls. And not only that, but they wore white ribbing pads around the lower parts of their legs. These last were extraordinary because they appeared to contain jets that allowed these curiously civilized robots to fly down from their hovering spaceship and start to kill people, which is what they did. "Hello," said Arthur. "Something seems to be happening." "Get to the ship," shouted Ford. "I don't want to know. I just get to the ship." He started to run. "I don't want to know. I don't want to see. I don't want to hear," he yelled as he ran. "This is not my planet. I didn't choose to be here. I don't want to get involved. Just get me out of here and get me to a party with people I can relate to." Smoke and flame billowed from the pitch. "Well, the supernatural brigade certainly seems to be out in force here today," burbled a radio happily to itself. "What I need," shouted Ford, by way of clarifying his previous remarks, "is a strong drink and a peer group." He continued to run, pausing only for a moment to grab Arthur's arm and drag him along with him. Arthur had adopted his normal crisis role, which was to stand with his mouth hanging open and let it all wash over him. "They're playing cricket," muttered Arthur, stumbling along after Ford. "I swear they are playing cricket. I do not know why they are doing this, but that is what they are doing. They're not just killing people, they're sending them up," he shouted. "Ford, they're sending us up!" It would have been hard to disbelieve this without knowing a great deal more galactic history than Arthur had so far managed to pick up in his travels. The ghostly but violent shapes that could be seen moving within the thick pall of smoke seemed to be performing a series of bizarre parodies of batting strokes, the difference being that every ball they struck with their bats exploded wherever it landed. The very first one of these had dispelled Arthur's initial reaction that the whole thing might just be a publicity stunt by Australian margarine manufacturers. And then, as suddenly as it had all started, it was over. The 11 white robots ascended through the seething cloud in a tight formation, and with a few last flashes of flame, entered the bowels of their hovering white ship, which, with a noise like 100,000 people saying, "Foop," promptly vanished into the thin air out of which it had whopped. For a moment there was a terrible, stunned silence, and then out of the drifting smoke emerged the pale figure of Slarty Bartfast, looking even more like Moses because, in spite of the continued absence of the mountain, he was at least now striding across a fiery and smoking, well-mown lawn. He stared wildly about him until he saw the hurrying figures of Arthur Dent and Ford Prefect forcing their way through the frightened crowd that was, for the moment, busy stampeding in the opposite direction. The crowd was clearly thinking to itself what an unusual day this was turning out to be, and not really knowing which way, if any, to turn. Slarty Bartfast was gesticulating urgently at Ford and Arthur and shouting at them as the three gradually converged on his ship, still parked behind the sight screens and still apparently unnoticed by the crowd stampeding past it, who presumably had enough of their own problems to cope with at that time. "They garble, warble, farble!" shouted Slarty Bartfast in his thin, tremulous voice. "What did he say?" panted Ford as he elbowed his way onward. Arthur shook his head. "They've something or other," he said. "They've table, warble, farble!" shouted Slarty Bartfast again. Ford and Arthur shook their heads at each other. "It sounds urgent," Arthur said. He stopped and shouted, "What?" "They've garble, warble, fashes!" cried Slarty Bartfast, still waving at them. "He says," said Arthur, "that they've taken the ashes. That is what I think he is saying." They ran on. Said Ford. "Ashes," said Arthur tersely. "The burnt remains of a cricket stump. It is a trophy that," he was panting, "is apparently what they have come and taken." He shook his head very slightly, as if he were trying to get his brain to settle down lower in his skull. "Strange thing to want to tell us," snapped Ford. "Strange thing to take. Strange ship." They had arrived at it. The second strangest thing about the ship was watching this somebody else's problem field at work. They could now clearly see the ship for what it was, simply because they knew it was there. It was quite apparent, however, that nobody else could. This wasn't because it was actually invisible or anything hyper-impossible like that. The technology involved in making anything invisible is so infinitely complex that 999,999,999,999 times out of a trillion, it is much simpler and more effective just to take the thing away and do without it. The ultra-famous Sciento magician Ephrafax of Wug once bet his life that, given a year, he could render the great mega-mountain Magramal entirely invisible. Having spent most of the year jiggling around with immense Luxo valves and refractor nullifiers and spectrum bypassomatics, he realized, with 9 hours to go, that he wasn't going to make it. So he and his friends and his friends' friends and his friends' friends' friends and his friends' 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 friends and some rather less good friends of theirs who happened to own a major stellar trucking company put in what is now widely recognized as being the hardest night's work in history, and sure enough, on the following day, Magramal was no longer visible. Ephrafax lost his bet, and therefore his life, simply because some pedantic adjudicating official noticed A, that when walking around the area where Magramal ought to be, he didn't trip over or break his nose on anything, and B, a suspicious-looking extra moon. The somebody else's problem field is much simpler and more effective, and what is more, can be run for over 100 years on a single flashlight battery. This is because it relies on people's natural predisposition not to see anything they don't want to, weren't expecting, or can't explain. If Ephrafax had painted the mountain pink and erected a cheap and simple somebody else's problem field on it, then people would have walked past the mountain, around it, even over it, and simply never have noticed that the thing was there. And this is precisely what was happening with Slarty Bartfast's ship. It wasn't pink, but if it had been, that would have been the least of its visual problems, and people were simply ignoring it like anything else. The most extraordinary thing about it was that it looked only partly like a spaceship with guidance fins, rocket engines, and escape hatches, and so on, and a great deal like a small, upended Italian bistro. Ford and Arthur gazed up at it with wonderment and deeply offended sensibilities. "Yes, I know," said Slarty Bartfast, hurrying up to them at that point, breathless and agitated. "But there is a reason. Come, we must go. The ancient nightmare has come again. Doom confronts us all. We must leave at once." "I fancy somewhere sunny," said Ford. Ford and Arthur followed Slarty Bartfast into the ship and were so perplexed by what they saw inside it that they were totally unaware of what happened next outside. A spaceship, yet another one, but this one sleek and silver, descended from the sky onto the pitch, quietly, without fuss, its long legs unlocking in a smooth ballet of technology. It landed gently. It extended a short ramp. A tall, gray-green figure marched briskly out and approached the small knot of people who were gathered in the center of the pitch, tending to the casualties of the recent bizarre massacre. It moved people aside with quiet, understated authority, and came at last to a man lying in a desperate pool of blood, clearly now beyond the reach of any earthly medicine, breathing, coughing his last. The figure knelt down quietly beside him. "Arthur Philip Deodat?" asked the figure. The man, with horrified confusion in his eyes, nodded feebly. "You're a no-good Dumbo nothing," whispered the creature. "I thought you should know that before you went." Chapter 4. It seemed to Arthur as if the whole sky suddenly just stood aside and let them through. It seemed to him that the atoms of his brain and the atoms of the cosmos were streaming through each other. It seemed to him that he was blown on the wind of the universe, and the wind was him. It seemed to him that he was one of the thoughts of the universe, and that the universe was a thought of his. It seemed to the people at Lord's cricket ground that another North London restaurant had just come and gone as they so often do, and that this was somebody else's problem. "What happened?" whispered Arthur in considerable awe. "We took off," said Slarty Bartfast. Arthur lay in startled stillness on the acceleration couch. He wasn't certain whether he had just got space sickness or religion. "Nice mover," said Ford in an unsuccessful attempt to disguise the degree to which he had been impressed by what Slarty Bartfast's ship had just done. "Shame about the decor." For a moment or two, the old man didn't reply. He was staring at the instruments with the air of someone who is trying to convert Fahrenheit to centigrade in his head while his house is burning down. Then his brow cleared, and he stared for a moment at the wide panoramic screen in front of him, which displayed a bewildering complexity of stars streaming like silver threads around them. His lips moved as if he were trying to spell something. Suddenly his eyes darted in alarm back to his instruments, but then his expression merely subsided into a steady frown. He looked back up at the screen. He felt his own pulse. His frown deepened for a moment. Then he relaxed. "It's a mistake to try to understand machines," he said. "They only worry me. What did you say?" "Decor," said Ford. "Pity about it." "Deep in the fundamental heart of mind and universe," said Slarty Bartfast, "there is a reason." Ford glanced sharply around. He clearly thought that this was taking an optimistic view of things. The interior of the flight deck was dark green, dark red, dark brown, cramped and moodily lit. Inexplicably, the resemblance to a small Italian bistro had failed to end at the hatchway. Small pools of light picked out pot plants, glazed tiles, and all sorts of little unidentifiable brass things. Raffia-wrapped bottles lurked hideously in the shadows. The instruments that had occupied Slarty Bartfast's attention seemed to be mounted in the bottoms of bottles that were set in concrete. Ford reached out and touched it. Fake concrete. Plastic. Fake bottles set in fake concrete. The fundamental heart of mind and universe can take a running jump, he thought to himself. This is rubbish. On the other hand, it could not be denied that the way the ship had moved had made the heart of gold seem like an electric pram. He swung himself off the couch. He brushed himself off. He looked at Arthur, who was singing quietly to himself. He looked at the screen and recognized nothing. He looked at Slarty Bartfast. "How far did we just travel?" he said. "About," said Slarty Bartfast, "about 2/3 of the way across the galactic disk, I would say, roughly. Yes, roughly 2/3, I think." "It's a strange thing," said Arthur quietly, "that the farther and faster one travels across the universe, the more one's position in it seems to be largely immaterial, and one is filled with a profound, or rather emptied of it." "Yes, very strange," said Ford. "Where are we going?" "We are going," said Slarty Bartfast, "to confront an ancient nightmare of the universe." "And where are you going to drop us off?" "I will need your help." Tough. Look, there's somewhere you can take us where we can have fun. I'm trying to think of it. We can get drunk and maybe listen to some extremely evil music. Hold on, I'll look it up. He dug out his copy of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and zipped through those parts of the index primarily concerned with sex, drugs, and rock and roll. A curse has arisen from the mists of time, said Slarty Bartfast. Yes, I expect so, said Ford. Hey, he said, lighting accidentally on one particular reference entry. Eccentrica Galumbits. Did you ever meet her? The triple-breasted whore of Eroticon 6. Some people say her erogenous zones start some 4 miles from her actual body. Me, I disagree. I say 5. A curse, said Slarty Bartfast, which will engulf the galaxy in fire and destruction, and possibly bring the universe to a premature doom. I mean it, he added. Sounds like a bad time, said Ford. With luck, I'll be drunk enough not to notice. Here, he said, stabbing his finger at the screen of the guide, would be a really wicked place to go, and I think we should. What do you say, Arthur? Stop mumbling mantras and pay attention. There's important stuff you're missing here. Arthur pushed himself up from the couch and shook his head. Where are we going? He said. To confront an ancient knight cannon, said Ford. Arthur, we are going out into the galaxy to have some fun. Is that an idea you can cope with? What's Slarty Bartfast looking so anxious about? Said Arthur. Nothing, said Ford. Doom, said Slarty Bartfast. Come, he added with sudden authority. There's much I must show and tell you. He walked toward a green wrought iron spiral staircase set incomprehensibly in the middle of the flight deck and started to ascend. Arthur, with a frown, followed. Ford slung the guide sullenly back into his satchel. My doctor says that I have a malformed public duty and a natural deficiency in moral fiber, he muttered to himself, and that I am therefore excused from saving universes. Nevertheless, he stomped up the stairs behind them. What they found upstairs was just stupid, or so it seemed, and Ford shook his head, buried his face in his hands, and slumped against a pot plant, crushing it against the wall. The central computational area, said Slarty Bartfast, unperturbed. This is where every calculation affecting the ship in any way is performed. Yes, I know what it looks like, but it is in fact a complex 4-dimensional topographical map of a series of highly complex mathematical functions. It looks like a joke, said Arthur. I know what it looks like, said Slarty Bartfast, and went into it. As he did so, Arthur had a sudden vague flash of what it might mean, but he refused to believe it. The universe could not possibly work like that, he thought. Cannot possibly. That, he thought to himself, would be as absurd as he terminated that line of thinking. Most of the absurd things he could think of had already happened. And this was one of them. It was a large glass cage, or box, in fact, a room. In it was a table, a long one. Around it were gathered about a dozen chairs of the bentwood style. On it was a tablecloth, a grubby red and white checked tablecloth, scarred with the occasional cigarette burn, each presumably at a precisely calculated mathematical position. And on the tablecloth sat some dozen half-eaten Italian meals, hedged about with half-eaten breadsticks and half-drunk glasses of wine, and toyed with listlessly by robots. It was all completely artificial. The robot customers were attended by a robot waiter, a robot wine waiter, and a robot maitre d'. The furniture was artificial, the tablecloth artificial, and each particular piece of food was clearly capable of exhibiting all the mechanical characteristics of, say, a pollo soppresso, without actually being one. And all participated in a little dance together, a complex routine involving the manipulation of menus, check pads, wallets, checkbooks, credit cards, watches, pencils, and paper napkins, which seemed to be hovering constantly on the edge of violence, but never actually getting anywhere. Slarty Bartfast hurried in, and then appeared to pass the time of day quite idly with the maitre d', while one of the customer robots, an autorori, slid slowly under the table, mentioning what he intended to do to some guy over some girl. Slarty Bartfast took over the seat that had been thus vacated and passed a shrewd eye over the menu. The tempo of the routine around the table seemed somehow imperceptibly to quicken. Arguments broke out. People attempted to prove things on napkins. They waved fiercely at each other and attempted to examine each other's pieces of chicken. The waiter's hand began to move on the check pad more quickly than a human hand could manage, and then more quickly than a human eye could follow. The pace accelerated. Soon, an extraordinary and insistent politeness overwhelmed the group, and seconds later it seemed that a moment of consensus was suddenly achieved. A new vibration thrilled through the ship. Slarty Bartfast emerged from the glass room. "Beastromathics," he said, "the most powerful computational force known to parascience. Come to the room of informational illusions." He swept past and carried them, bewildered, in his wake. Chapter 5. The beastromathic drive is a wonderful new method of crossing vast interstellar distances without all that dangerous mucking about with improbability factors. Beastromathics itself is simply a revolutionary new way of understanding the behavior of numbers. Just as Einstein observed that space was not an absolute, but depended on the observer's movement in space, and that time was not an absolute, but depended on the observer's movement in time, so it is now realized that numbers are not absolute, but depend on the observer's movement in restaurants. The first non-absolute number is the number of people for whom the table is reserved. This will vary during the course of the first 3 telephone calls to the restaurant, and then bear no apparent relation to the number of people who actually turn up, or to the number of people who subsequently join them after the show, match, party, gig, or to the number of people who leave when they see who else has turned up. The second non-absolute number is the given time of arrival, which is now known to be one of those most bizarre of mathematical concepts. A reciproverse exclusion, a number whose existence can only be defined as being anything other than itself. In other words, the given time of arrival is the one moment of time at which it is impossible that any member of the party will arrive. Reciproverse exclusions now play a vital part in many branches of math, including statistics and accountancy, and also form the basic equations used to engineer the somebody else's problem field. The third and most mysterious piece of non-absoluteness of all lies in the relationship between the number of items on the check, the cost of each item, the number of people at the table, and what they are each prepared to pay for. The number of people who have actually brought any money is only a sub-phenomenon in this field. The baffling discrepancies that used to occur at this point remained uninvestigated for centuries simply because no one took them seriously. They were at the time put down to such things as politeness, rudeness, meanness, flashiness, tiredness, emotionality, or the lateness of the hour, and completely forgotten about on the following morning. They were never tested under laboratory conditions, of course, because they never occurred in laboratories. Not in reputable laboratories, at least. And so it was only with the advent of pocket computers that the startling truth finally became apparent, and it was this. Numbers written on restaurant checks within the confines of restaurants do not follow the same mathematical laws as numbers written on any other pieces of paper in any other parts of the universe. This single statement took the scientific world by storm. It completely revolutionized it. So many mathematical conferences got held in such good restaurants that many of the finest minds of a generation died of obesity and heart failure, and the science of math was put back by years. Slowly, however, the implications of the idea began to be understood. To begin with, it had been too stark, too crazy, too much like what the man in the street would have said. "Oh yes, I would have told you that." Then some phrases like interactive subjectivity frameworks were invented, and everybody was able to relax and get on with it. The small groups of monks who had taken up hanging around the major research institutes, singing strange chants to the effect that the universe was only a figment of its own imagination, were eventually given a street theater grant and went away. Chapter 6. "In space travel, you see," said Slarty Bartfast as he fiddled with some instruments in the room of informational illusions. "In space travel," He stopped and looked about him. The room of informational illusions was a welcome relief after the visual monstrosities of the central computation area. There was nothing in it. No information, no illusions, just themselves, white walls, and a few small instruments that looked as if they were meant to plug into something that Slarty Barkfast couldn't find. Yes, urged Arthur. He had picked up Slarty Barkfast's sense of urgency, but didn't know what to do with it. Yes, what? Said the old man. You were saying? Slarty Barkfast looked at him sharply. The numbers, he said, are awful. He resumed his search. Arthur nodded wisely to himself. After a while, he realized that this wasn't getting him anywhere and decided that he would say, What? After all. In space travel, repeated Slarty Barkfast, all the numbers are awful. Arthur nodded again and looked around to Ford for help, but Ford was practicing being sullen and getting quite good at it. I was only, said Slarty Barkfast with a sigh, trying to save you the trouble of asking me why all the ship's computations were being done on a waiter's check pad. Arthur frowned. Why, he said, were all the ship's computations being done on a wait? He stopped. Slarty Barkfast said, Because in space travel, all the numbers are awful. He could tell that he wasn't getting his point across. Listen, he said, on a waiter's check pad, numbers dance. You must have encountered the phenomenon. Well, on a waiter's check pad, said Slarty Barkfast, reality and unreality collide on such a fundamental level that each becomes the other and anything is possible within certain parameters. What parameters? It's impossible to say, said Slarty Barkfast. That's one of them. Strange but true. At least, I think it's strange, he added, and I am assured that it's true. At that moment, he located the slot in the wall for which he had been searching and clicked the instrument he was holding into it. Do not be alarmed, he said, and then suddenly darted an alarmed look at it himself and lunged back. It's... They didn't hear what he said, because at that moment the ship winked out of existence around them, and a star battleship the size of a small Midlands industrial city plunged out of the sundered night toward them, star lasers ablaze. A nightmare storm of blistering light seared through the blackness and smacked a fair bit off the planet directly behind them. They gaped, pop-eyed, and were unable to scream. Another world, another day, another dawn. Oh, chapter 7, sorry. Another world, another day, another dawn. The early morning's thinnest sliver of light appeared silently. Several billion trillion tons of super-hot exploding hydrogen nuclei rose slowly above the horizon and managed to look small, cold, and slightly damp. There is a moment in every dawn when light floats, there is the possibility of magic. Creation holds its breath. The moment passed as it regularly did on Scornchellus Zeta without incident. The mist clung to the surface of the marshes. The swamp trees were gray with it, the tall reeds indistinct. It hung motionless like held breath. Nothing moved. There was silence. The sun struggled feebly with the mist, tried to impart a little warmth here, shed a little light there, but clearly today was going to be just another long haul across the sky. Nothing moved. Again, silence. Nothing moved. Silence. Nothing moved. Very often on Scornchellus Zeta, whole days would go on like this, and this was indeed going to be one of them. 14 hours later, the sun sank hopelessly beneath the opposite horizon with a sense of totally wasted effort. And a few hours later, it reappeared, squared its shoulders, and started on up the sky again. This time, however, something was happening. A mattress had just met a robot. "Hello, robot," said the mattress. "Bleh," said the robot, and continued what it was doing, which was walking around very slowly in a very tiny circle. "Happy?" said the mattress. The robot stopped and looked at the mattress. It looked at it quizzically. It was clearly a very stupid mattress. It looked back at him with wide eyes. After what it had calculated to 10 significant decimal places as being the precise length of pause most likely to convey a general contempt for all things mattressy, the robot continued to walk round in tight circles. "We could have a conversation," said the mattress. "Would you like that?" It was a large mattress and probably one of quite high quality. Very few things actually get manufactured these days because in an infinitely large universe, such as, for instance, the one in which we live, most things one could possibly imagine, and a lot of things one would rather not, grow somewhere. A forest was discovered recently in which most of the trees grew ratchet screwdrivers as fruit. The life cycle of ratchet screwdriver fruit is quite interesting. Once picked, it needs a dark, dusty drawer in which it can lie undisturbed for years. Then one night it suddenly hatches, discards its outer skin that crumbles into dust, and emerges as a totally unidentifiable little metal object with flanges at both ends and a sort of ridge and a sort of hole for a screw. This, when found, will get thrown away. No one knows what it is supposed to gain from this. Nature, in her infinite wisdom, is presumably working on it. No one really knows what mattresses are meant to gain from their lives either. They are large, friendly, pocket-sprung creatures that live quiet, private lives in the marshes of Scornsalis Zeta. Many of them get caught, slaughtered, dried out, shipped out, and slept on. None of them seems to mind this, and all of them are called Zem. "No," said Marvin. "My name," said the mattress, "is Zem. We could discuss the weather a little." Marvin paused again in his weary circular plod. "The dew," he observed, "has clearly fallen with a particularly sickening thud this morning." He resumed his walk, as if inspired by this conversational outburst to fresh heights of gloom and despondency. He plodded tenaciously. If he had had teeth, he would have gritted them at this point. He hadn't. He didn't. The mere plod said it all. The mattress flopped around. This is a thing that only live mattresses in swamps are able to do, which is why the word is not in common usage. It flopped in a sympathetic sort of way, moving a fair-sized body of water as it did so. It blew a few bubbles up through the water engagingly. Its blue and white stripes glistened briefly in a sudden feeble ray of sun that had unexpectedly made it through the mist, causing the creature to bask momentarily. Marvin plodded. "You have something on your mind, I think," said the mattress floopily. "More than you can possibly imagine," dreared Marvin. "My capacity for mental activity of all kinds is as boundless as the infinite reaches of space itself. Except, of course, for my capacity for happiness." Stomp, stomp, he went. "My capacity for happiness," he added, "you could fit into a matchbox without taking out the matches first." The mattress globbered. This is the noise made by a live, swamp-dwelling mattress that is deeply moved by a story of personal tragedy. The word can also, according to the ultra-complete Maximegalon Dictionary of Every Language Ever, mean the noise made by the Lord High Sanvalag of Hullop on discovering that he had forgotten his wife's birthday for the second year running. Since there were only ever one Lord High Sanvalag of Hullop, and he never married, the word is only used in a negative or speculative sense, and there is an ever-increasing body of opinion that holds that the ultra-complete Maximegalon Dictionary is not worth the fleet of trucks it takes to cart its micro-stored edition around. Strangely enough, the dictionary omits the word floopily, which simply means in the manner of something which is floopy. The mattress globbered again. "I sense a deep dejectedness in your diodes," it volewed. For the meaning of the word volue, buy a copy of Scornsalis Swamp Talk at any bookstore selling remained books, or alternatively, buy the ultra-complete Maximegalon Dictionary, as the university will be very glad to get it off their hands and regain some valuable parking lots. "And it saddens me," You should be more mattress-like. We live quiet, retired lives in the swamp, where we are content to flop and volue and regard the wetness in a fairly floopy manner. Some of us are killed, but all of us are called Zem, so we never know which, and globbering is thus kept to a minimum. Why are you walking in circles? Because my leg is stuck, said Marvin simply. It seems to me, said the mattress, eyeing it compassionately, that it is a pretty poor sort of leg. You are right, said Marvin. It is. Voon, said the mattress. I expect so, said Marvin. And I also expect that you find the idea of a robot with an artificial leg pretty amusing. You should tell your friends, Zem and Zem, when you see them later. They'll laugh if I know them. Which I don't, of course. Except insofar as I know all organic life forms, which is much better than I would wish to. Ha! But my life is but a box of worm gears. He stomped around again in his tiny circle, around his thin steel peg leg that revolved in the mud but seemed otherwise stuck. But why do you just keep walking round and round? Asked the mattress. Just to make the point, said Marvin, and continued round and round. Consider it made, my dear friend, flurbled the mattress. Consider it made. Just another 1,000,000 years, said Marvin. Just another quick 1,000,000. Then I might try it backward. Just for the variety, you understand. The mattress could feel deep in his innermost spring pockets that the robot dearly wished to be asked how long he had been trudging in this futile and fruitless manner, and with another quiet flurble, he did so. Oh, just over the 1.5 million mark, just over, said Marvin airily. Ask me if I ever get bored. Go on, ask me. The mattress did. Marvin ignored the question. He merely trudged with added emphasis. I gave a speech once, he said suddenly and apparently unconnectedly. You may not instantly see why I bring the subject up, but that is because my mind works so phenomenally fast, and I am at a rough estimate 30 billion times more intelligent than you. Let me give you an example. Think of a number, any number. 5, said the mattress. Wrong, said Marvin. You see? The mattress was much impressed by this and realized that it was in the presence of a not unremarkable mind. It willemeed along its entire length, sending excited little ripples through its shallow, algae-covered pool. It gulped. Tell me, it urged, of the speech you once made. I long to hear it. It was received very badly, said Marvin, for a variety of reasons. I delivered it, he added, pausing to make an awkward humping sort of gesture with his not exactly good arm, but his arm that was better than the other one that was dishearteningly welded to his left side. Over there, about a mile distant. He was pointing as well as he could manage, and he obviously wanted to make it totally clear that this was as well as he could manage, though the mist over the reeds, to a part of the marsh that looked exactly the same as every other part of the marsh. There, he repeated. I was somewhat of a celebrity at the time. Excitement gripped the mattress. It had never heard of speeches being delivered on Scornshella Seda, and certainly not by celebrities. Water spattered off it as thrill glurried across its back. It did something that mattresses very rarely bother to do. Summoning every bit of its strength, it reared its oblong body, heaved it up into the air, and held it quivering there for a few seconds until it peered through the mist over the reeds at the part of the marsh that Marvin had indicated, observing without disappointment that it was exactly the same as every other part of the marsh. The effort was too much, and it flodged back into its pool, deluging Marvin with smelly mud, moss, and weeds. I was a celebrity, droned the robot sadly, for a short while, on account of my miraculous and bitterly resented escape from a fate almost as good as death in the heart of a blazing sun. You can guess from my condition, he added, how narrow my escape was. I was rescued by a scrap metal merchant, imagine that. Here I am, brain the size of... Never mind. He trudged savagely for a few seconds. He it was who fixed me up with this leg. Hateful, isn't it? He sold me to a mind zoo. I was the star exhibit. I had to sit on a box and tell my story while people told me to cheer up and think positive. Give us a little grin, little robot, they would shout to me. Give us a little chuckle. I would explain to them that to get my face to grin would take a good couple of hours in a workshop with a wrench. And then that went down very well. The speech, urged the mattress. I long to hear of the speech you gave in the marshes. There was a bridge built across the marshes, a cyber-structured hyperbridge hundreds of miles in length to carry ion buggies and freighters over the swamp. A bridge? Quirrelled the mattress. Here in the swamp? A bridge, confirmed Marvin, here in the swamp. It was going to revitalize the economy of the Scornshella system. They spent the entire economy of the Scornshella system building it. They asked me to open it. Poor fools. It began to rain a little. A fine spray slid through the mist. I stood on the platform for hundreds of miles in front of me and hundreds of miles behind me. The bridge stretched. Did it glitter? Enthused the mattress. It glittered. Did it span the miles majestically? It spanned the miles majestically. Did it stretch like a silver thread far out into the invisible mist? Yes, said Marvin. Do you want to hear this story? I want to hear your speech, said the mattress. This is what I said. I said, I would like to say that it is a very great pleasure, honor, and privilege for me to open this bridge. But I can't because my lying circuits are all out of commission. I hate and despise you all. I now declare this hapless cyberstructure open to the unthinking abuse of all who wantonly cross her. And I plugged myself into the opening circuits. Marvin paused, remembering the moment. The mattress flirred and glurried. It flopped, gupped, and whinnied, doing this last in a particularly floopy way. Voon, it whirfed at last, and was it a magnificent occasion? Reasonably magnificent. The entire 1,000-mile-long bridge spontaneously folded up its glittering spans and sank weeping into the mire, taking everybody with it. There was a sad and terrible pause at this point in the conversation, during which 100,000 people seemed unexpectedly to say, whop, and a team of white robots descended from the sky like dandelion seeds drifting on the wind in tight military formation. For a sudden violent moment, they were all there, in the swamp, wrenching Marvin's false leg off, and then they were gone again in their ship that said, "Foop." You see the sort of thing I have to contend with, said Marvin to the globbering mattress. And suddenly, a moment later, the robots were back again for another violent incident, and this time when they left, the mattress was alone in the swamp. He flopped around in astonishment and alarm. He almost lurgled in fear. He reared himself to see over the reeds, but there was nothing to see, no robot, no glittering bridge, no ship, just more reeds. He listened, but there was no sound on the wind beyond the now familiar sound of half-crazed etymologists calling to each other across the sullen mire.